Welcome to On Earth as It Is in Heaven, brought to you each week with the support of the Eastern Orthodox Clergy Association of the Mahoning Valley and with the generous support of faithful listeners. It's our desire to expose orthodoxy to all who tune into this program and who speak of this experience to others. This is our effort at making small steps towards the salvation in the spiritual realm for all who listen. Here are your hosts for this week's edition of On Earth as It Is in Heaven.
Good afternoon on this beautiful fall and rainy day. This is great weather because I'm not sweating. And I'm here again with Father Joseph and with George Mansour. We last week we talked about the Age of Orthodoxy, Part 1, and now we're going into Part 2 today. Last week, if you don't remember, or maybe if you missed it, you can check it out on our St.Mark's Youngstown YouTube page. But last week we talked about a lot of things. We talked about Pew Research, talking about the state of Orthodoxy and the state of Christianity in America. And then also on top of that, we talked about, from the Barna Research Group, we talked about three different reasons out of the 6. Number 1 being that churches seem overprotective. Number 2, that 20-something experienced Christianity is shallow. And then, of course, we left off number 3 about science in the church. We didn't quite finish it. And so, again, today we have George and Father Joe. And so I'd like to welcome all of you to the show. And may God be with us as we continue to talk about Christianity in America, but also how this is the age of Orthodoxy. So let's pick up where we left off last week. Father Joe, what do you think?
So in that Barna study, one of the, that study, it was done about 10 years ago, and it kind of highlights why people, young people in particular, are leaving mainline church houses of worship, okay? And so we're on reason number 3, and it says, churches come across as being antagonistic to science, okay? And I'll just read some of their findings. They say that one of the reasons young adults feel disconnected from the church or from the faith is the tension they feel between Christianity and science. Most of the common perceptions in this arena is that Christians are too confident that they know all the answers. Okay? Yeah. Another one is 3 out of 10 young adults with a Christian background feel that the churches are out of step with the scientific world in which we live. Okay, and then another quarter seem to think that Christianity is anti-science. So that's where we are at, and I don't think most people don't know Christianity's relationship with science over the year, and that science was always seen, at least by the early church and the early fathers, as something blessed. It's just another one ways of that the Lord allows us to appreciate His creation. Science is one of the ways that we learn about Him, if viewed in the right way.
Well, I had read that Galileo actually, the church wasn't against what Galileo, the centric universe with the sun, etc., us revolving around the sun. The difficulty that I read about was that Galileo was actually, they had been school chums, the Pope and Galileo. And the Pope wanted Galileo to bring this gentleman in who also had this sun-centered concept in an effort to develop support for this, okay? Yeah. And Galileo really didn't care to do that because his ego said, no, I want it to be all mine. And the Pope insisted that he do this, and so he kind of thumbed his nose at the Pope, and he wrote the letter saying that because the Pope has told me I have to do this kind of thing, and so to chastise Galileo, he put him off. His estrangement, or what do they call it, exile, was to a bishop's palace. I mean, it wasn't like it was really awful, and Okay.
Oh, gee, that sounds terrible.
Oh, yeah, it had to be the worst, you know.
Oh, being fed such good food.
Yes, it's
Oh.
like being in the White House and being told to go to the Lincoln Room or something.
Yeah.
And so it was that kind of a thing, and I don't really know how it got to be what they talk about today,
Sure.
that it was this persecution of him, but actually he was just he was upset with the Pope for bringing anybody else in. I can't remember the name of the party now, but he also ascribed to the same, that we go around the sun.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to make a joke saying that the universe doesn't revolve around us, but I decided just to skip out of that. I think this is really interesting that many of our people struggle with this with science. I think science has become almost. I think it's become dangerous in a lot of ways. I think science has become dangerous. Doesn't mean that we can't use science. In fact, science always points to God in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, you can always find God in that. And again, it's like what you said. It shows us the beautifulness in creation. However, but science now, that the thing that we're fighting now is that science has become a god for people.
Yeah, you got to serve somebody, and if it's not God, it's going to be something else. And science is one of the many things people raise up, absolutely, as their God.
Yeah.
I was reading Jim Holt wrote a small piece, and he said that in 1916, 40% of American physicists, biologists, and mathematicians believe in God, and not just some metaphysical abstraction, but a deity who takes an active interest in our affairs and hears our prayers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, at the time of his writing of this, which I think was in the 70s. And so he said that percentage is exactly the same as it was in 1916 at the time of his writing, which was very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. And so I think we need to be cautious as Christians that we, as it says in the first one here, right? Christians are too confident that they know all the answers. 35% of that answer that. I think that needs to be a humility call for us, that we don't know all the answers and that we're not God. Yeah. And that just because we call ourselves Christians doesn't mean that we that we have the answers to everything. And I think it's in that humility and through repentance and through a life of prayer that God and time reveals the answers to us.
Right, or at least what's needed for our salvation.
Yeah.
Well, we may not be able to get the answers to everything, but He certainly gives us enough to be saved, to be with Him in eternity, which is the point of our lives. I have to wonder if some of it is just a fear of death. We seek to control. That's what we're afraid of, and so if we feel that we have all the answers, somehow we can avert the inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Father.
I think the relationship between science and faith really got derailed during the Enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
And where man and man's mind was elevated to such a degree that it somehow became adversarial with the church and faith, and that carries over into what we're dealing with now, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Darwin. Oh, come back here. Yes. Darwin and Wallace's theory of evolution, Holt wrote, seemed to banish divine providence from the sphere of nature once and for all, replacing it with the groping of blind chance. Cardinal Manning, vexed by the theory of evolution, said, there is no God and the ape is our Adam. In frustration of dealing with that. But my understanding of Darwin was that Darwin himself felt that it was all just theory. It wasn't scientific fact. And today what I see when I watch nature programs is an idolization of Darwin and of evolution, and that they constantly treat it as scientific fact. So they reference our primate ancestors.
Yeah.
Okay, that kind of thing. They treat it as scientific fact. And that's really, I suppose, where the church, you fathers, please correct me if this isn't correct, but that's where the church would take exception, is in establishing this as scientific fact. They negate the creation. Okay, they negate creation of Adam by the God who created us.
Yeah.
And so when science sets itself up as God, the church takes exception with that, but does not take exception with that which God gave us, which is the mind, which can work scientifically.
Well, yeah, and create and be an artist, because we call, in many of our prayers, we call God the artificer, right? The one who creates. Yeah. Right? I think with it, when it comes to evolution and the idolizing and worship of evolution, you are right. Darwin never wanted this to be famous, and he never wanted to be famous. I know from a lot of that. However, it took off because it was new. Yeah. And then it grew and expanded into what we have now, of this kind of complete, utter nonsense of man coming from ape. But I will say this, man can act like ape when he's in love with himself.
Yeah.
A man can act like an animal real quickly when he's in love with himself and in love with his sins. And many of the fathers talk about that, right? That man, if he's not too careful and vigilant and watchful, that he'll become like the beasts. And so we see that in King Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel's book, right? King Nebuchadnezzar loses his mind, and they find him in the field eating like a cow. You know, and so I think evolution is something that we probably just, I think as now we need to give an answer to. I mean, we do have answers from, especially from many of the church fathers like St. Basil and St. Augustine, but I think we kind of just need to ignore evolution right now and start teaching our children not just the other parts of our faith, but the beauty of creation and what is happening in those 6 days.
Yeah.
That God is creating us to know us and for us to know him. You know?
Right. Yeah, through the world, through all the phenomena that he created, we get close to him, his majesty, his mind.
Yeah.
But we fight a battle because for decades there's been the socialist agenda to wipe God out of the educational system. And so children really do not understand the relationship between church and science, and that there can be one. And as religious educators, part of how Orthodoxy can be the religion of the 21st century is to reunite these things, to affirm that God exists, and to support life. We're unabashedly in support of life as Orthodox, and science serves that. My own son is alive. He was born with some birth defects because of science, and we're thankful to the people God entrusted with the gift to effect the cure of the ailing. But again, it's within possibilities for us, but we've got work to do. We got work to do.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything else, George, before we head into the next one?
Just something to reiterate from last week for those who think that we think we have all the answers. The church doesn't lay claim to having all answers. Last week, what was shared was that this is the church in which, if there is an answer, it can be found here. And if we cannot find an answer, my experience has been anyone I ask who doesn't have an answer will research. And to the best of our ability, we go back to find where the answers are, because everything we have is that which was received, not that which we have constructed. And so if we ultimately cannot find an answer, this is the church that's not afraid to say, we don't know. And certainly with the mysteries, the sacramental life and so on, which is non-existent in 50,000 different denominations plus, is certainly a mystery for us. We don't have answers to the mysteries and openly acknowledge that, but are treated like, oh, well, that's because you're small-minded and not scientific. Otherwise, you would have the answer for it. So there.
All right, let's go to the next one. Go ahead, Father Joe.
Okay, so in the Barna study, reason number 4 why young Christians leave the church is because their church experiences related to sexuality are often for them too simplistic and judgmental.
Can you elaborate on that, Father?
Well, they have access, so much access, and it's in pornography and the objectification of the human body and of the opposite sex or the same sex, what have you, is been normalized for them, right? And they are immersed in a culture that values hypersexuality over what we would call Christian wholeness.
Yeah.
Which is to be fully integrated with God and the world around us. And so, teen 20-somethings are in their student unions as at church, at school, at the colleges. There's even clubs now in high schools that uphold lifestyles that they have to wade through all of this to figure out how to live meaningful lives in terms of sex and sexuality. What they're receiving from normal mainline churches, well, it's wrong, and don't ask any more questions. And I think Orthodoxy is balanced in our response, and yet we are still of a particular position that may get us, some opposition. You have to remember, or Christianity came about when pagan Rome ruled the world and when pagan Greece influenced the world. And so there was a lot of social mores and practices very much like our time today that the early church had to deal with. The early church, the early followers of God and Jesus Christ were always set apart in how they viewed sexuality.
Yeah.
Sexuality, a gift from God to us, but only within a certain context, because he calls all of us, single, married, monastic, lay people, to an angelic life, And for some, they wed themselves to Christ, our bridegroom, just by themselves, in either celibacy, monastic vows, and some he calls together to make a spiritual team out of them, and then together. And he blesses their union, their physical union, to procreate children, and so that we have a deeper understanding of his love for us and how he's begotten humanity. But, that necessarily means then if we're living a lifestyle, whether it's same-sex or opposite sex that is outside of the sacrament of marriage, again, the church knows that God calls us to an angelic life and doesn't approve intimacy apart from these things. Well, that gets us in a bunch of trouble.
Well, I think, but it's good to talk about these things. I think, it's really good to address this, especially for people who may not know anything about it. I mean, some people who may be listening may not understand why sexual immorality is wrong. Yeah, you mentioned, the early church, the early Christians, how they were witnessing this in pagan Rome, in the Roman Empire, and that we're seeing it now. To kind of shed some light on that, let's kind of go deeper into that so we can understand this. In ancient Rome and ancient Greece and the ancient Mediterranean kingdoms, the way that they worshiped their god would be through sexual immorality acts. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of it too would also, especially if you worshipped Baal, we see that in the Bible, or Moloch, a lot of times it also included sacrificing your children and then committing sexual acts. And we have to understand that it's disgusting, right? And now fast forward to where we're at now with pornography, where you see those same things, but maybe it's not in front of the god of Baal, but it's just a different form now, through digital pornography, through movies, through music, through video games, all sorts of stuff. And so our culture is immersed into it. And then it doesn't help that we have young girls and young men, from the moment that they get into school, they're immediately talking about healthy sex.
Yeah.
Right. And then to add to it, we say, all right, so in order not to get pregnant, here's a bunch of birth control to really throw off your hormones. And that does a lot of damage. That does a lot of damage to our children. Right. And so they're growing up to thinking that this is normalized. And deep down, they're dying. Yeah. They're hurting. Just think about when we were in middle school and high school and even younger, and the hormones that were already raging through us then, right? And now these kids have it 100 times more. And then on top of that, they're the busiest people I know. Teens are some of the busiest people I know.
How do you mean, Father?
Well, not only is school getting longer and longer, they're involved in every type of activity. They're working. Good grief, from the age of 4 or 5, we're already putting them in sports all year round.
Yeah, even to play on your high school football or basketball team, you have to go to all kinds of different camps. You have to be on traveling teams just so you can make the school team.
Yeah. And then if you're on top of those, you're deemed, one of the cool kids that's going to get with all the girls or guys.
Yeah, it does sound like that.
And it's a very, actually don't forgive me, it's a very pagan way of thinking. We're just in the Roman times now. In our 21st century culture, we're living like the early Christians. And so, you gave a statistic down here we didn't read, but I want to read it. It says 1/6 of young Christians, so 17%, said that they have made mistakes and feel judged in church because of them. I think a lot of this is down to, I don't think we're educating our children about sex. And not only are we, but also the parents as well, because it should be coming from the parents' mouth about the sex, about how a husband and wife come together.
Yeah.
And to understand the beauty of that. But unfortunately, so many parents are so scared to talk about it. But it's okay that they leave them in their room alone with their computer.
Yeah, and look at how the parents work today.
Sure. Absolutely.
I think a part of it is certainly there's a portion of this that is they don't have the time to parent because their lives are caught with all the things that have come to mean parenting. Making sure that they have all these opportunities and that, et cetera. And that's not parenting.
Compounded by Wokism, that if you dare to say anything against the current agenda, then you're automatically a hater.
Yeah.
And blacklisted from, wherever it is you want to belong to.
Well, and I think too, understanding and that's where this whole wokeism and all this, forgive me, but it's nonsense. And it's really evil way of thinking, because when we get into you're judging me for who I'm loving, and well, no, it's not that I'm judging you. I want to show you the other side. I want to show you the other side that is normal and that leads you to salvation.
Yeah.
Because we mock purity and chastity and virginity, and we think, oh, that's just an old way of thinking. Well, if that's an old way of thinking, then why are you in so much pain?
Yeah.
Why are you hurting so badly? And understand what purity is, and waiting until you're married and to have that relationship with your husband and your wife.
I'm hurting badly, so to speak, because you, the church, won't let me be who I am. Okay, you're constantly telling me what I'm not. Okay, if you would just leave me to be who I am, then I wouldn't be hurting. And I think that I've heard similar kinds of things like that from people, and it's like that's really that's a perversion of what's going on.
Yeah.
I think that the churches have had rigid rules. I think of the West, and I think of very rigid rules. And sometimes when people ask me how Orthodoxy is different, I said Orthodoxy has a lot of rules, and they stand by those rules, those laws, those canons. I said, however, there's flex, and that flex is on an individual a basis. You don't just make choices for yourself to flex the rules, but there's flex. I said in the West, it's very rigid, and when the rule won't flex, then it breaks, and when the rule's broken, it gets thrown away, and a new rule is put in place. And I said,
that does more damage.
Yes, I said, and so that's why we have 53,000 denominations out there of what I want, what I think, etc. And so I think, Father, there really is a problem. Sexuality was this rigidness of thou shalt not commit adultery. And of course, we're not to do that.
Sure.
Okay. But there was a condemnation if you were an adulterer, a fornicator, whatever your sexual sin was. And there wasn't an understanding of the church as a hospital where you get treatment to repair and grow and move away from that, which keeps us from closer communion with God. And exactly
leads to this, right? Feeling judged. I mean, I think why most people feel judged is because they feel convicted in their heart, and they need to go to confession to relieve that. And that is you mentioned. That's what's going to heal that pain and their brokenness. And just to confess that you're struggling with lust is going to heal you. Just to even do that, just to even get the sin out in the open, so the devil can no longer poke you and prod you. But that's what we're not teaching our teens and our 20-something is just to confess it. We know that this is your cross, but you're not alone. and to pray that God will give you the path between monasticism or a married life. Now, there's no difference in the Orthodox Church between monasticism and the married life, because the monastery is different. I mean, the home should become like a little church where we have our icon corner and our altar, and the husband and wife are praying together, and we're showing the children how to pray. It's the same thing in the monastery, right? We hold our own typicon, as we say, in the home, right? We have our own Orthodox services. But the problem is that we're not teaching the outlet and the purity and the chastity, and to confess it and to heal from it, and then to talk about sex and the married life, and that it is beautiful and it's blessed, and God willing. I mean, in the Orthodox marriage service, in the marriage sacrament service, it talks about, I mean, may the bed be blessed by the Holy Spirit, may you be fruitful.
Yeah. I think too the personhood is been kind of warped. We've come to define ourselves by the things that either tempt us, or the emotions that we have, or the sexual desires that we have. We were created to be living icons of Jesus Christ, living images of Him, and we have feelings and we have desires, but we don't define ourselves by those things.
Exactly.
We let Him define who we are based on the gifts that He's given us. And that's one of the paradoxes of faith, is that we become more who we are supposed to be. We become free to be who we were really meant to be by allowing Christ to help us figure that out, And we think, well, because I desire, certain things, and the church isn't about those certain things, then the church doesn't want me to be me. That's not true. We have the wrong idea of what personhood is.
Well, humility, subjugation is a dirty word in our world. Before I say anything more, I want to say that before there was a woke society, the things that we are seeing today were in place, and this was occurring before anyone brought up the idea of a woke culture. This has been going on for years, and some of my friends who have difficulty when they see men on television holding hands or kissing, or that this television show there's a lesbian relationship and so on, I ask them, I say, well, don't you like Bond movies? Well, you like the Bond movies, so you underwrote Me Too, adultery, fornication, etc.
Right.
And if we underwrote this and we didn't say, no, this is wrong, we don't want this in entertainment, this is ungodly. Well, so this was in place long before woke society, and then when the people who couldn't be depicted, I think it was a magnificent gambit on the part of Satan, because once we allowed our fantasies and desires to be expressed on those screens, it was only a matter of time before others said, if it's okay for you, hypocrite, why isn't it okay for me?
Yeah.
And so we have the pagan situation that we have, which has been contributed to, I'll speak for myself, by myself in my youth and so on, and many others.
I've had people approach me that bring up that hypocrite angle too with the church. They say, Father, I am a practicing homosexual. I want to be accepted in the church and receive the sacraments. And we have a talk about that, and I tell them why it is that they have excommunicated themselves, basically, from the chalice. And they say, but wait, that's hypocrisy, because I know there are people who are coming to receive communion who are cheating on their wives, who are looking at pornography, who are stealing from their work, embezzling. How come they're allowed to, and I'm not? And I basically have to tell them, because they're not coming to me telling me that although I'm doing these things, I still want to be accepted by God and still be admitted to the sacraments. They're not coming to the chalice on their own terms. I first of all, I don't know about these. And secondly, if people are doing these things and they are repentant, then yes, they can receive the sacraments so that they can be strengthened in their battle against their temptations. So really, it's all about, for me, where the heart is on the whole matter. If you're struggling and you need help, then by gosh, yes, the church is there for you, and the sacraments are there for you. That is, if you're willing to, in your repentance, to live according to church precepts.
Well, that goes into the ekonema, right? The each individual is at a different walk, with Christ. And so for some individuals, we, especially as father confessors, we have to be a little bit more stricter than others, but that's for each person. And some are more, especially if a person is repenting and trying to get away from this, of course, why would we deny them the sacraments of Christ? But if someone's openly saying, well, I don't really care, I'm going to do this anyway, but I still want you to give me the sacraments.
That's right.
No, this is not how this works, right? It's not, we're protecting you from the chalice.
Because it's a fire that burns.
It's a fire that burns. And so, and I think for a lot of this, it's, this is the war that we're fighting, especially against the evil one. And we're not going to win it. We're not going to win it through blogs and through yelling at people or through writing articles. It comes down in our prayer life by getting on our hands and knees and asking God to help us and to forgive us and to, because if we're not repenting, then the people won't repent. And I have to tell myself, especially as a priest, that if I want my people to become more spiritual, then I have to become more spiritual. And so if I want my people to stop fighting against these sins, then I have to fight with them, right? And ask for Christ to give me the strength. And so a lot of this, I think, it comes through a lack of education. I think a lack of prayer, a lack of humility, lack of understanding the image of God, being that icon. Understanding why marriage is beautiful, why you're given crowns. It's not because you're a king and queen.
No, tell that to a few people.
You're not. It's not there for gratification, right? You're dying. You're dying to your spouse. That's why you're given the crowns of the martyrs, and you have your first dance in the church by walking around the little altar out front, and it shows that these two really become one. You're no longer two, but one.
And when they take that walk, the hymns that they are singing as they're walking are about the martyrs.
Yeah, about the martyrs. And so I think we kind of forget that, and we see the beauty. And I think also, too, part of it, I think another thing, too, is why we're seeing a lot of problems with sexuality is because we're seeing a lot of people get married very late in their life. Instead of praying for somebody, first of all, praying to God and to the Mother of God, the Theotokos, to help them find a helpmate. And then finding that person and settling down with them and having them walk with you in your life. Yeah. Not waiting till you're 40 and 50 years old because I want to have my career first, because everything else is, that's important, then I'll figure it out.
And by that time, you probably will have fallen to one temptation or another. That's why in His love for us, the Lord shortened our days. If we lived to 500, chances are the devil's going to figure out a way to trip us up at some point.
Yeah.
I think people, we as human beings, don't understand bearing the cross.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's taught anymore.
No.
And by taught, I mean spoken out to others, taught not only by those who stand at the lectern on the solea in the church, but by parents to their children, by adults one to another, by teens one to another, that carrying your cross is what it's about, struggling against the passions which we're constantly confronted with, and living the life of the ascetic, which is falling down and getting up and falling down and getting up, which is what the monks tell us is the life of a monk.
Yeah. Life of the Christian. It's the life of the Christian.
So it's the life of a Christian.
Again, that's normal life.
Mm-hmm.
I think, is it all right if we go to the next one?
Absolutely.
I think we need because this next one's going to be really good too.
Okay.
I think this is going to hit a lot of things because of, especially with the universalism and ecumenism.
Okay.
Go ahead, Father Joe.
So reason number 5 in the Barna study is why young people leave the church is that they wrestle with the exclusive nature of Christianity. Younger Americans have been shaped by a culture that esteems open-mindedness and tolerance and acceptance. Today's youth and